Welcome back to economics. This will be the last video that we cover for week 3. We'll also be finishing the notes today. Friday will technically be your study review day for the upcoming test. And then when you get your week 4 packet, you will be taking the chapter test then. So you'll get the test next week in your week 4 packet, and everything else that I'll be assigning today, along with what we've talked about earlier, will be all due with the week 3 packet. So the homework, the quiz that I'll be assigning today, all of that will be due with the packet. We're at Roman numeral 3, Antitrust Policy. And to begin with, I want you to be on page 175 so that you can read the first 2 paragraphs under Antitrust Policy to yourself. Once you have finished, please unpause the video and we'll resume. All right, letter A, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Prior to 1890, one of big business's favorite ways of limiting competition without actually forming a monopoly was to form what was called a trust. Here's a definition of a trust. It is when the head of an industry's largest company persuades the other firms to combine their stock in one account. Another thing that is worth noting about a trust, the head of the industry then administrates the account, controlling the promotion, quantity, and prices of each firm's products. This political cartoon that you see on the screen here shows us what the view of trusts were like. The picture of the big men include all the different trusts that were out there, the Steel Trust, the Copper Trust, Standard Oil Trust, just to name a few of them. And then all those little guys pictured down there who look to be frantically working, those are the congressmen, representatives of the U.S. government. The idea was big business controlled Congress, and they were doing their bidding. Well, to counteract the power of a trust, Congress enacted the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. This is what the Sherman Antitrust Act did. Basically, the act made trusts and monopolies illegal, which, by the way, was the first act to do so. Penalties for violating the act included things like fines and imprisonments. Letter B, the Clayton Act of 1914. The Sherman Antitrust Act led to the breakup of certain monopolies, such as Standard Oil and American Tobacco. But because the act was vague in certain points, other businesses found ways to limit competition without technically monopolizing the industry. The solution was to pass the Clayton Act of 1914. It closed most of the gaps found in the Sherman Act, and that's probably the thing you'll want to write down about the Clayton Act. It closed most of the gaps found in the Sherman Act. Let's mention a few specifics. One thing that the Clayton Act did was it got rid of interlocking directorates. Definition for an interlocking director, or description of it, is placing one or more directors on the boards of competing firms. I mean, imagine that. Imagine if they had a business leader who was in charge of Ford, then deciding, you know what, let's also make him a partial owner of Chevrolet. That sounds like a conflict of interest, but back in those days, that's exactly what happened, because what that really meant was the guy controlled both companies. So interlocking directorates, placing one or more directors on the boards of competing firms, that now became illegal. Another thing that was made illegal was creating tying contracts. Tying contract requires smaller businesses to buy all of a company's products if they wanted to sell one of their products. For example, suppose that the owner of a small retail store wished to sell a certain manufacturer's line of shoes. That company would force the store owner by contract to carry its less desirable line of costume jewelry in order to carry its shoes. In fact, many large businesses would even refuse to sell any of their products to smaller firms if those firms carried any products of a competitor's. So imagine if you own a little store and you want to sell Adidas clothing, clothes, and Adidas told you, no, yes, we'll let you sell our clothes and our shoes, but you're also going to have to sell our jewelry that we have. Well, who buys Adidas jewelry? Not too many people. But in order to sell the shoes and the clothes, you also have to sell their jewelry. Oh, and by the way, if you have Nike products, Reebok, Under Armour, etc., you can't sell any of their products. So tying contracts, literally tied up the retailer and forcing them to these deals. Well, this law was made illegal, or this action was made illegal. Number 3, anti-competitive takeovers. This description is when corporations bought a controlling share of their competition's stock. When corporations bought a controlling share of their competition's stock. Number 4, price discrimination. This was when firms sold the same good to different buyers for different prices. You understand how this goes. Oh, yeah, okay. Yes, I will sell my product to you for $50. Oh, but, person number 2, I don't like you so much, so I'm going to charge you $100 for the same thing. No, price discrimination became illegal. On page 177, there is a box entitled Monopoly Anyone? I want you to read that box to yourself. Once you have finished, please unpause the video and we'll resume. Letter C, other legislation. 3 different laws were created in addition to the antitrust laws that we've already talked about. So let's talk about them. Number 1, the first one is called the Federal Trade Commission Act, the FTC. Thing you need to know about it is it was created in 1914, and the purpose of the FTC was to enforce the Clayton Act. It was to enforce the Clayton Act. It investigates alleged violations, it holds hearings, it issues cease and desist orders if a suspected firm is found guilty of unfair methods of competition or unfair acts or practices. By the way, it's still around today, in case you were wondering. One other thing worth noting about the FTC, it protects consumers and competitors. Number 2, the Robinson-Patman Act. Small retailers were complaining that large chain stores were receiving price discounts as a result of quantity buying. The large stores were then able to sell their products at a lower price than the small retailers were. So, the Robinson-Patman Act was created. What you need to know about it is it made it illegal for suppliers to hinder competition by selling at unreasonably low prices. And lastly, number 3, the Anti-Merger Act. This act is sometimes called the Keller-Kefauver Act. What you need to know about it is it prevented the practice of one firm purchasing another firm's assets. See, certain businesses would buy a competing firm's buildings, equipment, and inventory, enabling them to control the market all the same. This act made this kind of quasi-merger illegal. Seemingly, Every day, another business closes its doors, unable to compete any longer in the market. Were there too many other firms and too much competition to allow another newcomer to survive in that industry? Was the business unable to differentiate its product successfully and create its niche in the market? Was the business just not able to compete against rival firms who were better able to control prices? Having read this chapter, you should be able to answer such questions. When you read articles about local businesses, you should be able to make sense of references to imperfect competition, oligopolies, and monopolies. You could even look at some of the more prominent industries in your town and be able to classify them by industry and identify the number of firms, the differentiation of products, the control of prices, and the ease of market entry and exit within the industry. You should also be able to explain the primary reasons for and the principal points of the Sherman, Clayton, and Robinson-Patman Acts. In addition to all this, a board game, perhaps one of your favorites, now takes on a whole new meaning for you. It may be time to play. But not quite yet, because you've got homework first. That, my students, is the end of the notes for your homework, and this is due with your Week 3 packet. You need to do pages 105 and 106 in your activities book, as well as 107 and 108. Looking at that real fast, page 105, 106 is a crossword puzzle, and page 107 and 108 is a chapter review. Please make sure that you do both assignments and that you turn it in with your packet. Also, the Chapter 9 Define quiz is in your packet. You are responsible for taking that quiz as well and getting it turned in. Hope you all have a good weekend. If you have any questions, please email me or contact me via Skype, and we will be able to get that taken care of. Hope you all have a good rest of the day. Be good, do good. Bye.